Hey guys, this is Eric Weingartner with Weingartner Racing. This is going to be a really short video. The reason for it is this head isn't even available, I don't think, in this form anymore. But I am doing a little product review because some people said there's no information about these heads out there. So like, what head is this? And then some of you are like, oh, another small block Chevy head. Well, if Ford heads came in or more power heads came in, I'd do the same video. They just don't. I happen to see more small blocks. So yeah, I know it's weird. What, it shouldn't be more LS, shouldn't it? I get those, but small block Chevy seem to be it. LS guys are kind of cheap and they don't send stuff in. Anyway, what head is this? This is as you can tell, there's no label on the ends, which makes it a good, clear indication it's a Dart head. This is actually a Dart, which the label's gone, but this is a Dart SHP 220. So a small block Chevy head. Now, the reason why I say this one probably won't apply to many of you now is because this head is no longer, it's available, but it's no longer like this. So let me kind of back up. Probably 2009, 10, somewhere in that range, probably or so. Dart was making the Pro 1 Platinum. So they started off with a Pro 1 head. So if you go back to the early iterations, Dart was making a Pro 1 head. And then they said, well, we need to make this a little bit better. And they came out with the Pro 1 Platinum with some vast improvements over what had been done. And those were more expensive, but they were a huge step forward in the progress. So at the same time, though, they realized that they needed a budget-friendly option for customers. So they said, we still have the molds for the Pro 1. Why don't we just relabel those as the SHPs? And so for several of the heads, they became the SHP heads. So for instance, the 200cc Dart SHP head was essentially the Dart Pro 1 non-platinum 200cc head. Now the 180 was a bit different. The 180 actually had the intake port from the platinum head, chambers from the non-platinum head, and exhaust port from the non-platinum head. This was all going this way, and I actually sold quite a few of those SHP heads when they first came out because they really were a great bang for the buck. So just to give you an idea, I'm going to go back in time, so the price is a little bit different. But at the time, they were selling their Pro 1 Platinums for like $1,500, which, just for the record, at the time, AFR was selling their full CNC ported heads for like $1,600. So it was only $100 more to get the full CNC head from AFR. So the Pro 1 Platinums, they were really priced out of the market, but the SHPs were $1,000. And that, to me, that was the selling point, because the only other heads at the time, American, by the way, you could still, at that time, the only Chinese head that I knew that was out was the Pro Comps, and they were absolutely garbage, and anybody that bought them knew they were garbage. They only bought them because they were cheap. But at $1,000, you had something in between. You had a head that made good power, and the only other head that was comparable to it was the Brodix IK heads. And the Brodix IK heads were the same price. Oddly enough, they're almost the same price now. They really haven't increased their price on that IK head. It really is the best budget-friendly head. But the SHPs were about $1,000, and I was selling the crap out of them. And then Dart, like many other companies, get a little greedy and screw it. And here's what I mean. For probably 3 years, they're about $1,000. And they said, you know what? We need a price increase. They didn't go up $50. They didn't go up $100. They went up $300. So now it was $300 more. And at the same time, Brodix IK heads were still $1,000. I didn't sell one single Dart SHP once they had the price increase. I'd be willing to bet that those sales, that they're like, we need to charge more so we can make more money. I promise you that by raising the price, they sold probably a third of the heads that they had, and in the end, lost more money by raising the prices. I do kind of wish that some businesses would learn, I get you trying to make the most money, but when you raise prices, they just will not buy from you. There's a point where they're going to go somewhere else. Now, I know that's a long rant, but I want to get to this. About that time, when they're realizing, hey, it's $1,300, maybe the reason why we're not selling very many is because we don't have a bigger one. So at the time, they only had a 180 and a 200. So then they introduced this one. This is the Dart SHP 220 head. This head, and I'm going to show you this one to get an idea for a comparison, is essentially the Dart Pro 1 non-platinum 230cc head. You might say, you don't know. You don't know. I do, because I've got both here. So we'll start off with some of the basics. It has, let me grab my little pointer. It has a 208 intake valve and a 1/600 exhaust valve. 64cc chamber. This chamber is not at all. It's better than some chamber designs, but it is not at all as nice as the more modern chambers. So if you look at the Pro 1 head Platinum, you would see that the chamber design is dramatically different. If we look at the intake port itself, it's aluminum, but it has a bronze guide, which is fine. But if you notice, which is hard to see because of the lighting, let's see if we don't get some rapid fire glaring. There we go. See that teardrop right there? The new ones have a actual vein that comes up further this way. It's a much better design. This is an old design, not as well. You'll also notice it looks like someone has blended this. No, from the factory, and Dart used to do this to begin with. They used to hand bowl blend all of them like this. This is what you see. It still has the same valve job that came on the Platinum one, so that's a good job there as far as valve job goes. And if we look over at the exhaust port, move my light here, you've got the same similar situation. You have no vein. Let me see if I change my camera position for you guys. You don't really have a vein too much on this side. The Pro 1 Platinum ones are much better. You can see a ridge in the chamber. Now this customer, by the way, did kind of polish the chambers, just so you see. Just trying to help them out. And that's what it is. Now if you're like, that's not a Dart head, let me flip it over and show you some more. This is the other sign that it's not a... How do you tell if you have a Pro 1 Platinum versus non-Platinum? You see this hole right here in the center? Although it's not drilled through... Stock heads had an exhaust port so you could heat up the crossover. They went through this exhaust port or this one. Sometimes they went through both on the stock heads. Some went through this side, some went through this side. Doesn't really matter. But that's what that hole was for. The non-Platinums had it. The Platinum heads, this is all flat. That doesn't exist because no one in the performance world uses that. We look at the top side, it says 220. He'd done all this polishing stuff, the customer did, trying to help with the oil flow. And it says DRT, standing for Dart. You know what's strange about it? This is another sign that's it's not a Pro 1 Platinum one. Platinum one will have a solid, see how wide this is from here to here? All the way across will be that. So from the valve cover rail all the way down to here is solid aluminum. There's no cutouts like this. It's a solid pad. This is the SHP. So there's that. Now I'm going to show you flow numbers, don't go worry. But I want to show you this one. So this one actually is a Dart Pro 1 230cc non-Platinum head. So I told you they were the same because I have them both together. There's some differences and I'll show you. So this was probably the last run before they switched over to the Platinums. And which is really hard to tell, so I'm trying to see this, but back my camera, my light out just a little bit. Oh, hopefully you can see it. No, there we go. Stay there. There it is. The bowl blend on the non-Platinum and Platinums was done with a CNC machine. That's why you can see the CNC lines. So this was done on a CNC machine. If you notice, that chamber looks identical to the SHP. Exact same one. The vein that doesn't there, almost the exact same. Same thing on the exhaust, although it's really hard to see. So I'm going to just push it over this side so you can kind of see. Boom. You can tell everything about the head looks almost identical. There are some small differences, which I'll show you real quick. This says Dart. No Dart. Okay. And then on the top side, 230 instead of 220. Still says DRT for Dart. So anyway, that's the two heads. What I'm trying to tell you, get at, to the whole point of this is they didn't redesign a port for the SHP 220. What they did is they took this one and put it in this one and said, you've got a 220. Now, did I CC both to make sure? No. Chances are the reason why that one's bigger is CC-wise is probably because that bowl is a little bit larger, or at least that's what they claim. As far as the port designs go, they're identical. So, how do they flow in comparison? Here you go. This is the SHP, and as you can tell, I'm going to go through this. Both are flowed on the same board, by the way. 226 at 4, and 264 at peak, and it kind of stays there. Exhaust does to 177 or 178 at 4, and 209 peak. This without exhaust pipe. How's that compared to this Dart Pro 1 230? 222 or 223 versus a 227, 226. There are only 3 CFM difference. How about a 600? 265 on the Pro 1 230 to a 263, 3 CFM difference. You see what I'm saying? They're almost identical. The flow numbers are almost identical. And you could say that, well, it's just because people blended it. As you could tell from the chambers, both were blended by a person doing it by hand. So they're not that far off. Exhaust, 180 versus a 178 at 400. 209 to a 205. They're almost identical. Point being is, if you're on the Facebook Marketplace and you see a set of Dart SHPs, older ones, they'll be like this. Now, back to what I was getting at. When Dart was owned by Richard Maskins. He's the one that created the company and stuff, and there's probably more history to it, but for the most part, he owned the company. When he passed away a few years ago, the company was sold to a private equity group. And you know how I feel about private equity groups, especially the one that bought this one. The one that bought Dart was race-winning brands, and in everything they have bought, everything, they have turned into an absolute crap. They suck the money out of it, and I don't do nothing with it. In every company that they have bought, if you are a consumer and you're buying a part from that company, it is now shit. And I mean by either one, it doesn't come in, the delays are beyond belief, or two, the product isn't as good as what it was. And mostly because you've got to think about that company, that private equity group is trying to maximize profits. You don't maximize profits by putting more effort into a product. You maximize it by putting the least amount of effort and charging the same or more. So what had happened was when race-winning brands bought that, and there was probably some changes too. I think at that time, because if you know anything about Dart, they don't cast their own heads. So the only companies American companies that cast their own heads, to my knowledge at this point, and I'm fairly certain on this, Brodix casts their own heads, and so does Profiler. Those are only 2 American casting foundries. So whoever was casting for Dart, probably whenever about the same time that the private equity group took over, said, hey, we're going to focus more on other stuff, because they probably had a relationship with Richard Maskins that they did not have a relationship with race-winning brands. So then race-winning brands had to scramble to find other stuff as well, I'm sure. So what they did is, because they were probably only getting so many castings from this company, this is all speculation, getting so many castings from this, they were like, why make any more SHPs? Let's just focus on the Pro 1 Platinum stuff and the Pro 1 line. Screw the SHP. Instead, what we'll do is we'll make it overseas. And I say that because Richard Maskin was strictly an American guy. He's going to stick with America as much as possible. The new management just doesn't have that same view. And what I'm saying for this is because the SHP line that you buy now does not look like this at all. The SHP line now looks like a Chinese imitation of the AFR heads. So if you get an AFR head and then you get a Dart SHP, say 200, that looks just like the AFR CNC ported 195. So in other words, this is speculation. Somebody took the AFR head, had it copied and cast over in China, and Dart's selling that. And before you're like, whoa, Dart, you piece of crap. AFR is actually selling the Chinese imitation or copy of the Dart Pro 1 Platinum 200cc head. That's their enforcer head, allegedly. So I think it's back and forth, what I'm trying to say. Point being is, if you get the SHPs now, they do not look like that. They look like the AFRs. And I'm sure there's some small differences to make it where they're like, no, we didn't copy. We changed this little bit of it, so it's not an exact copy, so don't get this on copyright things. I'm sure or patents. I'm sure that's part of it. But what I'm trying to say is older SHPs will look like this. The newer ones will look more like an AFR casting, except for it's as cast. So, and to be quite honest with you, the newer ones are superior to these. Newer SHPs are much better than this. But if you happen to get on Facebook Marketplace and you see some older SHPs and you want some more information, they're essentially the Dart Pro 1s, non-platinums. These heads, by the way, when ported, have made great power. Will they make as much as the Pro 1 Platinum ported? No. You can remove material. It's very difficult to add material, but they still make gobs of power, which means this can still make gobs of power. Maybe not as much as others, but you get the idea. Anyway, that is the video for this. Thanks for sticking around. I thought it'd be a shorter video, but sometimes they get a little long-winded, and you find out more information than you thought. So anyway, guys, remember, I'm no Superman. No, I do not port heads, the cast iron heads, sorry. I port heads all the time. I do not port cast iron heads. I don't know anybody that ports cast iron heads. I'm no Superman. You guys take care.